So what happens when a community believes marriage itself is in a full-blown crisis? Today, we're going to break down the core document of a modern faith-based movement that claims to have the answer. It's called the Covenant Family Resurrection Movement. You know, every movement gets its start by pointing to a problem it wants to solve. And for this group, that problem is a huge crisis in the institution of marriage. So let's take a look at how their own foundational text defines this emergency. The document doesn't ease you in with a mission statement or a nice preface. Nope, it just starts with this single, arresting number that's really designed to stop you in your tracks. 80%. So 80% of what? Well, according to the text, that number represents the chunk of Christian marriages that end in either a legal divorce, which we all understand, or something the document calls an emotional divorce. That's a state where the relationship is basically over in everything but name. And the document is crystal clear about where it lays the blame for this crisis. This isn't a critique of society in general. It's a very pointed statement that the evangelical community as a whole has failed its own members. And this failure, as they see it, has these devastating, widespread consequences. The text argues it's like a domino effect that impacts the entire family structure, what it calls the covenant family unit, and it trickles all the way down to the individuals inside it, the kids, the husbands, and the wives. And get this, the document frames this as not just a social problem, but as a profound spiritual one. It uses some really powerful theological language, claiming the consequences have severely desecrated the body of Christ, the church, and every single community. So in this view, a failed marriage isn't just some private tragedy, it's a public sacrilege. Okay, so after defining such a deep crisis, the document naturally shifts from the problem to the solution. So what's the proposed antidote to this desecration? Well, it's all framed as a movement for resurrection. So what is this movement exactly? The text defines it as a group that's trying to resurrect the covenant family. The strategy here isn't top-down. It's more of a grassroots thing, counting on a groundswell of like-minded believers to actually create the change. And what's the ultimate goal of this resurrection? The document puts it pretty simply, to establish Christ-centered families. This is positioned as the direct counterpunch to the emotional divorce and the failure that they identified right at the beginning. All right, so we've got the why, this crisis, and we've got the what, the resurrection. But what about the how? The next part of the document really lays out the specific method for making all this happen. Their approach is laid out as a simple three-stage process. First, it all begins with what they call foundational biblical principles. The second step is to take those principles and apply them in practical, real-world ways. And then the final stage is to turn those actions into consistent, everyday habits. Now, the text makes a really crucial distinction about these principles. It argues they are not new ideas that someone just invented. The central claim here is that these are ancient, lost truths that just need to be uncovered and put back into practice. So these so-called lost principles are positioned as the answer. They're the foundation for the resources the movement provides. And those resources are aimed squarely at anyone who has experienced what they call the plague of divorce, whether that's emotional or legal. And the audience they're trying to reach is intentionally broad. The resources are actually designed for every stage of a relationship. You've got prevention for the newly engaged, intervention for couples who are having trouble, and even restoration for marriages that are already considered failing. So after making its case, laying out the problem, the solution, and the method, the document shifts gears. It wraps up with a direct appeal, outlining what the next steps are for anyone who's convinced by the argument. And the appeal is totally straightforward. It's not just presenting information, it's issuing an invitation. The final call to action is as simple as it gets. Join the movement. But what does joining actually mean? Well, the text lays out 3 specific ways to get involved. You can offer spiritual support by becoming prayer partners, you can engage personally by checking out the content, and you can actively promote it by sharing that content with other people. And really, the entire document is ultimately boiled down to one final, urgent plea that just sums up its whole purpose. We need the covenant family to be resurrected. And that's the core argument of this movement's foundational text. It leaves us with this central thought-provoking question. Can ancient, lost principles really provide the solution to what feels like a very modern social crisis? It's an idea that sits right at the very heart of their philosophy. Thanks for joining us for this explainer.